Welcome back. It's good to see you, Richard. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. You doing okay?
Doing all right. And here we are on the last weekend of August.
I was going to say we're sliding out of August.
Yep, and we're here to talk about this, our final week on this topic of parental alienation.
Right.
And we've talked about what it is. We've talked about the effects on the child, short and long-term effects on the child. And today we're going to wrap it up talking a little bit about the effects on the parent, but also talk a little bit about where do we go from here? How to treatment and healing and trying to get through this.
Right. As we've mentioned in the past two podcasts, this is a topic that we don't know a great deal about it. We don't know much about the topic. We know it's exceedingly damaging to everybody involved, but there are major parts of this that we know frighteningly little about, and but we want to talk about some of those other issues. We talked about the effects on children. We talked about what it is and why it occurs. Now we want to talk about the effect on the alienated parent and what we can do about that. What the alienated parent might do, because they're the one in the most disadvantageous position when it comes to parental alienation.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear more about the effects on the child, you can check out last week's podcast.
Right.
But again, we want to emphasize that parental alienation is different than estrangement. It's different than just being separated. It's different than and it's different than a child not wanting to be with a parent, for lack of a better phrase, for just terms, for just reasons. A lot of times that you will see that when there's a history of abuse or neglect and things like that. But what we're talking about here is a situation where, usually following a divorce, a child has been turned against a parent. They had a previously strong relationship, but they've been turned against that parent by the other, the alienating parent, and by twisting some of their memories and by just presenting things and talking about things in a really negative way to turn the child against the other parent.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the important difference here. Is we're talking about the difference between alienation and estrangement. Is in alienation, there was a previous positive relationship. The parent and the child got along just fine. And then suddenly there's a divorce, and suddenly there's this alienation that occurs. There's this separation, and the child moves away from that targeted parent for no apparent reason.
Right.
The targeted parent really didn't do anything to deserve it, and that's the difference between estrangement and alienation. So we're talking about, we don't want to mix those two, because there are times when a parent has either been neglectful or maybe abusive, and there's a good reason why the child doesn't want to be with the parent. But we're talking about alienation, where there was a good relationship, now that relationship no longer exists, or there's could even be a hostile relationship as before.
Right. Absolutely. Right. So as we turn to talk about the effect on the targeted parent or the alienated parent, we found a great article from Psychiatric Times, and we'll have a link in the show notes to it. Right. And it's written by a couple of physicians who are talking about the experience of another colleague of theirs who experienced parental alienation, and they talk about the experience and the turmoil that colleague experienced, as well as there's a portion of the article from a forensic psychiatrist who talks about how it can be prevented and treated. So that the link is in the show notes, but we'll kind of talk a little bit about that article and what that experience was.
Right. What I like about this article is it does contain both parts. Yeah. It's a very personal account of a colleague of theirs, but it's also there's also a section, the second section of the article is written by a forensic psychiatrist who looks at the legal and long-term effects and possibly prevention of parental alienation. So it contains both parts, which I think is really helpful.
Right, absolutely. And so I think that when, again, we're focusing on the effects of the alienated parent.
Right.
I think one of the things that the physician talked about, their colleague talked about, is how suddenly, without really any warning or any signs, nothing that he could say or do was okay.
Right.
It was like everything changed, and all of a sudden he was demonized, and he was just
public enemy number one. All of a sudden everything has changed. And the kids that he had a good relationship with suddenly didn't want to talk to him anymore. Didn't want to see him. Didn't want to talk to him. Ghosted him. They call it ghosted him. What are they? I'm going to do what on Facebook? I'm going to. What do they call it when you cut somebody out?
Unfriend them?
Is it what it is? Unfriend you? No, there's another term for it. But they get ghosted. It's like their kids just disappear. They don't get, there's no communication, no Father's Day card, no birthday wishes. They're unavailable at holiday times. They go to ceremonies. They go to award ceremonies or school productions or band concerts or athletic competitions, but they're not invited. They're not really a part of it. They can observe, but they can't be a part of it. And there's this sudden break that makes no sense to them. He refers to it as the adversary that accepts no compromise. That's kind of a good explanation, a good description of it. There is no compromise here.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that all of those things, and if in the event that the alienated parent attempts to do some of those things, attempts to go to an award ceremony or attempts to come to school, that sort of adds fuel to the child's frustration and anger with the parent.
What are you doing here? You're not welcome in my life. Well, I'm going to an athletic competition, but you're not welcome here. And it can further alienate the parent.
Right.
The parent's trying to do the right thing, and it just fuels the child's anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sadly, many refer to this as though the alienated parent has lost the child, like in the death of a child. It's
unexpected and unexpected and premature death. That's kind of, it's sort of what the child is going through. The child and the parent is going through the similar experience, as if one or the other had died prematurely, unexpectedly.
Yeah, and so this loss, and I think what with people that I've worked with who've experienced this, the real challenge is they know, many times the parent knows exactly where the child is. They know that, if I turn down this road and go right down there, that's where he is.
Right.
But I can't have any contact with them, or the child resists me or pushes me away or doesn't allow me to have anything to do with them. And so there's that very odd experience of knowing exactly where the child is, knowing what, knowing how they could get to them, how they could get access to them, but at the same time not being allowed and being restricted from them because of the child's behavior oftentimes, and having no contact with them. So it's really, really an odd and strange position for the parent to be in.
Yeah, it really is. And I've seen that. I've seen it in the office where children will become irate if the alienated parent attempts in any way to reconcile, to talk, to do something. Hey, you want to go out and have dinner? Do you want to go out and go for a walk? And the child becomes irate. It's an immediate verbally aggressive stance by the child. They really push hard against the alienated parent.
Right. And so the parent experiences all of the same, like we said a moment ago, all the same type of loss, the same type of grief, and sometimes it is accompanied by guilt, by feelings of guilt, that what is going on and what is happening is losing that relationship with the child. And again, it's important to note that prior to the alienation, the parent and the child typically had a pretty strong relationship. They had the prior relationship was very positive and many times very strong.
Right.
But now all of a sudden it's deteriorated to nothing.
Miss it. That's right. That's right. Not only is it gone, it's adversarial. I
Right.
mean, it's aggressively adversarial.
Yeah.
Kids can get really, really hostile, and it's a shock to the parent, because it seems to come out of nowhere. But to identify it, and I mean that's one of the issues. The previously good relationship is one of the factors in determining whether alienation has occurred. There's something known as the 5-factor model
Yeah.
that's used to identify parental alienation. It's things we've talked about already. The first factor is the child avoids, resists, and refuses. Okay, of course. The second factor is the presence of that previously positive relationship. And that, I think, is the defining characteristic here. You had a good relationship. So that's the second factor. And then the third factor is there is no abuse or neglect. We talked about that. That's the difference between estrangement and alienation.
That doesn't
And
mean
then,
that, well, that doesn't mean that there aren't allegations or
right.
accusations of abuse. Many times, many times, there are allegations and accusations.
Mm-hmm.
It says that they're unsubstantiated and there's no evidence, or there's never any substance to it.
Right. Yes, sadly, we see that in a number of cases where false allegations of abuse are made. It's sort of it's akin to bringing out the really heavy artillery. A parent will try desperately, even if there wasn't abuse, they'll allege that abuse occurred.
Right.
And that sets the legal wheels into motion. And even if it's not true, it's very disruptive. It's additionally disruptive to an already difficult process. Then the fourth factor is multiple alienating behaviors by the favored parent. The parent will continue to use other tactics to make that separation even wider. And the fifth factor is the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation that are experienced by the child. And we're not going to discuss these in the podcast, but if you go to the article, there's a table right on the first page of these 8 behaviors. And so if you're interested in those, there's a really easy to follow table in the first page of that article. And as you said, it's the website for the article is in the show notes. So.
Right. And we went through those in the previous podcasts when we talked about where we introduced Parental Alienation Syndrome. Mm-hmm. So once we recognize that it's happening, and as we're moving towards what we're going to do about it, how we're going to treat it, we need to talk about the severity.
Exactly.
Parental alienation, and there is the sort of the mild, moderate, and severe, as we often think about some of these conditions. Mm-hmm. And mild parental alienation is when the child resists contact with the other parent, resists some of that. But once they get there and they kind of get comfortable and things like that, then the child seems to enjoy the relationship and things are okay. But again, that active resisting has to be there. That, like we talked about a moment ago, that's sort of the hallmark, is that the child is actively resisting and sort of opposes the other parent actively. It's just that once they get there and this is one of the arguments for really pressing the child to have visitation, because once they get there, then they tend to enjoy the time. Now, later on, they may say they don't. Later on, they may say that it was horrible and all that kind of stuff. But at least while they're there, they tend to enjoy the time together. That's
right. You kind of touched on that last week when you said that you made the point that frequently the child would go to the targeted parent. They will profess, I don't want to go. But when they're there, they have a good time. And so the targeted parent says, oh, okay, things are getting better. Child goes back to the alienating parent. So, oh, I hated it. I didn't like it, because they want to stay allied to the alienating parent. Right. So the last thing the child knows that they can't, I had a great time. Everything's great. I love I love my mom. I love my dad. I like the other kids who were there. We had a great time. That's the last thing the child can say, to stay allied to the alienating parent. Right. And so they go home and say it was terrible. But it really wasn't terrible, and they're feeding off each other.
Right.
But that's different than a moderate alienation.
Yeah.
All too often we see that.
Yeah, because with moderate, we see that persistent opposition to the visitation. So the child strongly resists contact, and even when they're there, they still resist interacting with the parent as much as they can. They may stay in their room the whole time. They try not to interact with them too much. They will go for the visitation eventually. Right. They'll press against it as much as they can. But even when they're there, they're still opposing the other parent and resisting any contact or as much contact as they can.
Right. One of the common things we get in the legal system is a judge will say, I want you to see the parent twice a week for 2 hours for a 2-hour visit. I want you to go 2 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Thursday.
Right.
The children agree. They go to the targeted parent. They don't speak. They don't eat. They don't drink. They don't accept anything. They stay silent. When the 2 hours are up, they go home. So that's moderate alienation. They will go, but they remain passively aggressive.
Right.
And they have no discussion, no comment. Even the targeted parent will offer, hey, do you guys want Coke? Do you want to drink? Do you want to eat something? Do you want to go out? No. They're there, but they remain persistently oppositional.
Right. And then of course, severe is the child not only opposes the idea of visitation or anything, but the child adamantly refuses contact to the point where they may even try to run away, or they'll try to hide or do something to resist or prevent having to go visit the alienated parent.
That's right.
We see this, of course, when the alienating the parent that the child has allied with, where that parent is really apparently obsessed with the idea of turning the child against the other parent.
Right.
In those cases, we see this risk of severe parental alienation at its peak. But the child not only opposes the idea, but actively does things to refuse any contact with the other parent. Right.
And then everybody worries about, am I doing more damage by forcing the child to be there? It almost takes physical restraints to get the child in the car and get them to the other parent. So then you say, am I doing more damage than I want to do in that case? Right. So the general agreement, is there any way to prevent alienation? There is, if the parents begin with an amicable separation and divorce. The problem is, if you can have an amicable divorce, you can probably have an amicable marriage. I mean, if two parents are able to get along, chances are they wouldn't be getting divorced. Well, so you have sort of an adversarial set of circumstances in the beginning. Parents are already angry with each other.
Right. I think that when I work with parents who are getting divorced, what I talk to them about is that, sure, you may be in a situation where the marriage is no longer going to work out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
However, you both have the obligation of raising kids. You have to be allies with each other with the common goal of raising healthy, emotionally strong children. What happens is when the parents become so adversarial that they, in essence, seek to punish the other parent. And that really seems to be the source of a lot of this, is where they just want to harm the other parent.
That's right. They see this as a win-lose. I'm losing my marriage, so I'm going to win. I'm going to do all that I can to win as much as I can. And of course, the most valuable thing in a marriage are the children. Everybody agrees with that. So if I want something, I want, some people want money and some people want time, and but mainly we want the kids. We want to maintain a relationship with the children. But you're right. Many times parents will seek to alienate in order to win, in order to punish the other parent.
Right.
Sometimes it's just to gain the support of the children because a parent is going through this tumultuous upheaval and they're feeling very emotionally vulnerable and they want support wherever they can get it. And frequently, all sadly, they seek support and comfort from their children.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that last week about adultification.
Right.
You're relying on the children. So one is to punish, but other is to get support and comfort.
Well, right. And the real concern too is when one of the parents is so emotionally or socially vulnerable,
sure,
that they can't cope with things, and so they don't have anybody else, and so the child only sees them, damaged and sad and unable to function. Through, especially depending on the age of the child,
right?
It's going to really pull that child to, like, I cannot believe that the other parent put my mom through this or my dad through this, and so it's not necessarily in those situations, it's not necessarily active. The parent isn't necessarily doing it intentionally, not at first at least, but it does kind of start organically that way. So parents have to be, if we, with our hopes to prevent it, parents have to be willing to work with one another in an amicable way, in a way to suggest that, we both want what's best for the kids. We both want them to have a relationship with both of us, with both parents. And we got to be willing to, get the outside help that we need.
That's right.
To cope with what we're going through with the divorce, so that we don't pull the kids into the middle of it.
That's right. You don't turn to the child for support. The children are having their own struggles. Everybody's struggling through this. If you need emotional support, get it from somebody else. Get it from a relative, get it from a therapist, get it from a friend. Get the support you need from other people. Keep your children out of that, of playing that supportive role. Okay. So first of all, you never denigrate the other parent. That's rule number one. And second, you don't rely on the child for emotional support. That's not that. No child should be put in that position. They need help. The child needs emotional support. That's what we should be doing. Of course, have those difficult discussions when your children aren't around. And then in the end, you might have to accept the other parents, your ex spouse's new partner. Okay. And that's another huge set of challenges, that you have to accept that person, because if you don't, what's going to happen is the targeted parent starts a new relationship, and that further divides everybody, because the children of the first marriage feel disenfranchised. They feel, well, I'm not a part of let's say dad's new life. Well, no, you've elected not to be, or you haven't been, and so you're not part of the new life, which further alienates the children. So you get this, as you say, this organic sort of development that occurs, that increases the alienation.
Right. Yeah, I think that parents often have to remember that, the court system sort of has a default that it immediately looks for. It's always for the best welfare, the best
the best interest of children. Right.
But what many states, like here in Florida, their first default is now 50-50.
Right. Yeah, it's not a law. It's not in the code, but that's the aspirational goal.
Right.
Is shared parental responsibility.
Right. And it's difficult, I think, for one to say, well, my ex-spouse now shouldn't be left alone with the kids because, he or she makes really bad choices or something, when just, 3 months before, you were perfectly willing to leave the children home alone with that spouse. And but at that time, y'all were married and everything was, well, y'all were still married, living in the same house and everything. And now all of a sudden, the person isn't trustworthy enough to leave the. So those kinds of things, parents really have to think about that and recognize that, the law, the system is going to automatically start working in the direction of 50-50 or something
That's right.
towards that. And there's going to have to be a preponderance of evidence to suggest that it shouldn't be that way.
That's right. That's right. That's what the courts are going to be seeking. And the other thing you can do is you can consider something like mediation or collaborative divorce.
Right.
Collaborative divorce is a system that puts the child first. In other words, the parents have to put their needs aside. Let's take care of the children, both with visitation, financial future, education, all that stuff becomes the focus. So the welfare of the children become the focus in collaborative divorce.
Right. So if parental alienation happens,
Right.
There's a couple of different things to do. One to go through the court system is tough because you need rigorous proof that it's happening, and it's hard to prove.
The trouble with you really can't go through the courts. Parental alienation is exceedingly difficult to prove, and you have to document it. Well, how do you document it? Well, you could call witnesses. Well, who are the witnesses? They're family, friends, and family members, who see the alienation, and you're asking them to testify against the ex. You can track down your children's emails and texts and social media posts, but you're sort of stalking your own children in order to gather this evidence. Right. So it's really difficult to get what they would call incontrovertible evidence of alienation. It's extremely difficult to gather, and it could even be more problematic to gather. You could be creating more problems. You can also request an evaluation, a psychological evaluation, a custody evaluation, but those are pretty expensive, and most parents don't have the financial means to do that. And then you can't assure the outcome. Right. There's no guarantee that the evaluation is going to get you where you want to be.
Right. They're expensive. They're time consuming. And oftentimes what the results tend to be, maybe family therapy or something like that to try to help reunify the child with the parent. But remember that, parental alienation isn't a crime. Something that it should be,
right, because
of the losses and the damages and stuff that it does to the child and to the alienated parent. But, at the same time, again, for all these reasons that we're talking about, it's so difficult to verify and to be sure. All of a sudden now you're going to have people who are all of a sudden you're going to have people who are accused and potentially found guilty of this. And again, thinking about what it will do to the child has allied with this one parent and alienated the other parent. And if it's found to be true, you're going to take away the alienating parent, the parent that the child has allied with, but the child is still against the other parent, so now the child has no parents that they can really trust and really found.
That's right.
It is a really complicated idea to even move in that direction.
Right. If you criminalize it, then what's the punishment? You say, okay, you committed this crime, so this is your punishment. Do you fine them? Well, money is already a problem in most divorces. So you don't want to levy a fine against a parent. Do you put the parent in jail? Now you're creating even more problems. So it's not a crime, and nobody's sure that we should criminalize it. What might be approaching criminal behavior is that parental alienation is viewed by some as a form of child abuse.
Right.
Okay. But again, it's very difficult to prove. It's not technically a psychological disorder, but is it a form of child abuse? If it's determined that it's abusive behavior, then it may be necessary to remove the child. But again, that is a decision that is fraught with a number of possible problems.
Yeah, a lot of the same issues that we talked about before. So when you're talking about healing from parental alienation, it's so, again, I think this is just the phrase that we're just going to keep saying. It's a very challenging scenario because all of the work has been done by the parent who is doing the alienating. they've done all of the effort to remove the child from this other parent. And so the only person that really has any motivation to do anything is the parent that has been alienated.
That's right. The sad part, when you get to healing, when you get to what do I do about it, the sad fact here is that all the work has to be done by the alienated parent.
Right.
Okay. They're the one that's the parent who's experienced the loss and the grief. They're the ones who you're not seeing the children. You can't do anything about it. And so all of the work is done by the targeted parent. The alienating parent doesn't have to do anything.
Right.
And there's absolutely no incentive.
Right.
If you want to alienate your children, you have no incentive to reconcile, to fix that relationship. I mean, you've already accomplished your goal.
Right. Yes.
There's no motivation for you to do anything.
Right.
You can sit back, no matter what anybody does, no matter what the targeted parent does, no matter what the targeted parent's family might do, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter what the court system does. The alienating parent can just sit back and let everybody else do all the work.
Right. So the best course of action for the targeted parent, or the parent that has been alienated, is to remain calm and to try to respond without anger or without rage or anything like that. They oftentimes need to get the support of family and friends, or maybe even health professionals, to help them cope with the challenges and struggles associated with it. But the main course of action is just to remain calm, maintain compassion and kindness as best as possible. And then, hope, I suppose, that the child then comes back around. But, the even when the child comes back around, you talked about this the other week, it's tough to rebuild, because there's going to be suspicion. There's going to be, hesitation. There's going to be a lot of, trying to rebuild something that has been really fractured in a way that's tough to put back together again. So it's a long haul.
That's right.
For helping them.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And the best advice is, if you have been alienated, you have to seek help and support from wherever you can get it, family, friends, or professionals, to cope with the strain. There really is very little. Part of the problem with the alienation is the feeling of impotence that the parent has. You just can't do anything about it. Wow. Damage has been done, and it's extraordinarily difficult. And the most you can do is cope with these very unfortunate circumstances. Yeah. There is a program for kids. I don't know much about it. I know that it exists. It's called I Don't Want to Choose, How Middle School Children Can Avoid Choosing. It's a school-based program. And there's an article that we put in the show notes if you're interested in this sort of thing, either as an educator or a parent. There's an article in the show notes about it. As I say, I'm not familiar with the program, but it's encouraging to see that such programs exist.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. As a final note, I think that we should mention that, for the parent who has been alienated, the target parent, I think that, one of the things that we do in those situations is we continuously work to create a connection and reach out to the child or children, and try to create some connection. But there may be a time when it's important to stop doing that, because either it could potentially worsen the situation, or it's just going to keep making it difficult for the parent to cope with what's happening. And so, if the child becomes increasingly hostile, if the child threatens a restraining order or something like that, or if the child says, something along the lines of they just need more time and that they'll get back in touch with you and that when they're ready, those may be times when it's okay, I need to step back, stop pushing so much. I'm available. I'll be here if and when they need me. But otherwise, I have to move forward with my life, and I have to look what's next for me. because I can't hold on to this hope that something will happen when there's not necessarily a guarantee that it will.
Right. You know, the targeted parent has to recognize that chances of reconciling after a certain amount of time are pretty slim, and there really is very little you can do about it. So the best thing to do is to take care of yourself, get the help and support that you need to make it through this set of very unfortunate circumstances.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. That kind of wraps up our 3-part series on parental alienation. We'll start on a different topic next week, but hopefully it was helpful for you guys. And if you, again, want to check out the show notes, there's some articles in there covering some of the things that we talked about in more depth, and with some more resources. So,
right.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
Okay. See you in September.
I'll see you then. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.